Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Young and the Restless channel. Hope you're having a wonderful day. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and hit like for more daily drama updates and spoilers. Your support truly means a lot and helps our channel grow every day. Now let's jump straight into today's exciting update. The storm brewing in Genoa City was no longer just about broken marriages, wounded pride, or old rivalries simmering beneath polished smiles. This time, the danger felt darker, more personal, and terrifyingly unpredictable because at the center of it all stood Patty Williams, a woman whose obsession with Jack Abbott had once again begun spiraling into something deeply unstable. Somewhere inside her fractured mind, Patty had convinced herself that destiny still belonged to her and Jack, that the years of rejection, betrayal, and heartbreak were merely obstacles delaying the inevitable future they were meant to share together. But what made the situation truly chilling was the possibility that Patty had finally stopped waiting for fate to bring Jack back to her and instead decided to force destiny into motion with her own hands. And if that was true, then Diane Jenkins Abbott may have already become the latest victim trapped inside Patty's dangerous fantasy. The first signs that something was terribly wrong emerged quietly, almost innocently, but the unease surrounding Diane's disappearance began growing heavier with every passing hour. Later in the week, Kyle Abbott confided in Jack that he was deeply worried about his mother because nothing about Diane's recent behavior made sense. Diane had missed 2 full days of work at J-Boat without checking in, something Kyle knew she would never do under normal circumstances. The silence felt unnatural, alarming even, especially for someone as careful and responsible as Diane. Driven by growing panic, Kyle went searching for answers and headed to the Genoa City Athletic Club, expecting to find Diane there resting or needing space after the emotional chaos surrounding her marriage. But when Kyle entered Diane's suite, a cold realization settled over him almost instantly because the bed had not even been slept in. The room felt abandoned, frozen in time, as though Diane had vanished before she ever had the chance to return there. Kyle's instincts screamed that something terrible had happened, and once he shared those fears with Jack, the atmosphere around the Abbott family shifted dramatically. Jack listened carefully as Kyle explained that none of this behavior fit Diane at all, and behind Jack's guarded expression, concern began hardening into dread. Then suddenly, another disturbing detail came rushing back into focus: Patty's flowers. Just the week before, Patty had sent Jack an enormous bouquet accompanied by a handwritten note claiming she intended to step back and give him space. At first glance, the gesture had almost sounded reasonable, perhaps even remorseful, but buried inside that message had been one unsettling line that now echoed in Jack's mind with horrifying clarity. Patty had written that she hoped Jack would soon have a reason to reach out to her. At the time, it sounded cryptic and manipulative, but now, with Diane missing and unreachable, the meaning behind those words suddenly felt far more sinister. Inside Patty's distorted reality, Diane was never truly Jack's soulmate. Patty likely believed Diane was simply the obstacle standing between herself and the life she deserved with Jack Abbott. In Patty's mind, if Diane disappeared, then Jack would naturally drift back toward her, almost as if the years of rejection and heartbreak could simply be erased overnight. Patty may even convince herself that Diane abandoned Jack willingly, especially considering Diane's complicated history of faking her death years ago. The twisted logic would make perfect sense to someone as emotionally unstable as Patty. She would ignore the obvious truth that Diane would never leave Genoa City without saying goodbye to Kyle, never vanish without explanation, never willingly destroy the family she fought so hard to rebuild. But Patty's obsession had never been grounded in reality. Her love for Jack existed inside a fantasy world where every rejection was temporary and every obstacle could somehow be removed. As the week unfolds, the tension between Jack and Patty becomes even more explosive. Patty approaches Jack directly and asks whether he received the flowers she sent him, clearly hoping for some sign that her gesture had affected him emotionally. Instead, Jack coldly informs her that he threw the flowers straight into the trash before walking away without hesitation. The rejection stings instantly, but Patty refuses to let him escape so easily. She chases after him desperately, asking whether he still wants her help bringing down Victor Newman. Jack's response is sharp and unforgiving, reminding Patty that she hardly seemed interested in helping him before and accusing her of playing a role in Victor's destruction of his marriage. The pain in Jack's voice becomes unmistakable as he tells Patty she has not changed at all. Yet instead of backing down, Patty insists she can prove him wrong, clinging to the idea that redemption is still possible for her. The conversation takes an even darker emotional turn when Patty points out that Jack forgave Diane for all her lies and for faking her own death. To Patty, that forgiveness represents hope, proof that Jack can eventually forgive anyone, including her. But Jack immediately crushes that illusion by telling Patty that Diane was redeemable while Patty is not. And then comes the final blow, the truth Patty refuses to accept no matter how many times she hears it. Jack tells her plainly that he still loves Diane. For most people, those words would end the fantasy forever, but Patty's obsession runs far too deep for reality to penetrate. Instead of retreating, Patty smiles through the rejection and calmly says that she loves a challenge before warning Jack that he may be surprised by how everything turns out. The statement lands like a threat disguised as optimism, another chilling glimpse into how dangerous Patty's thinking has become. From that moment on, it becomes painfully obvious that Patty is spiraling toward another breakdown, and this time her obsession feels more reckless than ever. Shortly afterward, Patty visits Victor Newman and announces that she intends to stay permanently in Genoa City. She proudly declares that she plans to become a prominent citizen again and even asks for Victor's support. Then, with complete confidence and absolutely no trace of self-awareness, Patty boldly announces that she intends to become the next Mrs. Jack Abbott. Victor can barely contain his laughter, openly calling Patty delusional right to her face. But Patty refuses to be humiliated. Instead, she reminds Victor that she has already married Jack twice before, clinging to those marriages as proof that her dream is still achievable. The history Patty refers to is as tragic as it is disturbing. The first time Jack married Patty, he did not truly love her at all. In reality, he was still secretly involved with Diane and was largely motivated by his desire to prove to John Abbott that he could settle down and stop acting like a reckless playboy. In fact, Jack had even been late to his own wedding because he was literally in bed with Diane beforehand. The second marriage was somehow even more twisted because Jack did not even realize he was marrying Patty. Plastic surgery, manipulation, and deception allowed Patty to lure Jack in under an entirely different identity, building a fantasy relationship based on lies and obsession. Those memories are not cautionary tales to Patty. Instead, they fuel her delusion, convincing her that somehow, against all logic, she and Jack are destined to end up together. And now, inside Patty's fractured imagination, another wedding is already unfolding. Somewhere in her mind, she can already see herself walking down the aisle wearing a beautiful white gown while Jack waits for her at the altar. That fantasy may very well explain what happened to Diane. The timing is impossible to ignore, especially since the last known contact anyone had from Diane came when she left Jack a heartfelt voicemail saying she was still hurt but still deeply loved him and wanted to find a way forward together. Diane even explained that she was on her way to the Abbott mansion so they could finally talk face to face and try to repair their marriage. But after that message, Diane vanished completely. No one heard from her again. And the horrifying possibility now hanging over Genoa City is that Patty intercepted Diane before she ever reached Jack. If Patty truly kidnapped Diane, there are countless terrifying possibilities regarding where she may be hiding her. One likely location is the Abbott cabin, a place already tied to some of Patty's darkest and most traumatic history. Years ago, Patty herself had been hidden there after being kidnapped, and the cabin remains isolated enough to become the perfect prison for someone trying to disappear another person quietly. But Patty could just as easily have Diane trapped somewhere far worse, an abandoned warehouse, a remote campsite, or even secretly restrained inside Patty's own suite at the Genoa City Athletic Club. Whatever the location may be, by the end of the week, both Kyle and Jack begin realizing that Diane may not simply be missing. She may actually be in serious danger. Jack will almost certainly begin retracing every clue, every interaction, every strange moment leading up to Diane's disappearance. And eventually, his mind may circle back to Patty's flowers and that haunting line about him having a reason to contact her soon. The realization would hit like ice running through his veins. Because if Patty orchestrated Diane's disappearance specifically to force Jack into reaching out to her, then this is not just another emotional spiral. This is calculated manipulation wrapped inside obsession. And terrifyingly, Patty has proven before that she is fully capable of doing something this extreme. The horrifying history surrounding Patty's instability stretches back years, and it includes consequences that permanently shattered lives. In 2009, Patty herself was once kidnapped and hidden away at the Abbott cabin. Jack's niece, Colleen Carlton, Tracy Abbott's daughter, accidentally discovered Patty there while searching for Jack. Believing she was helping someone in distress, Colleen freed Patty from captivity. But instead of gratitude, Patty responded with violence and paranoia. She kidnapped Colleen, dragged her to a remote camp, and tied her to a tree like a prisoner. Terrified and desperate to escape, Colleen eventually broke free, stole a canoe, and paddled out onto the lake, trying to flee before Patty could catch her again. But tragedy struck when Colleen fell from the canoe into the water. She nearly drowned, suffering catastrophic brain damage in the process. The emotional devastation that followed remains one of the darkest chapters in Abbott family history. It was Jack himself who found Colleen and rushed her to the hospital, clinging to hope even as the situation grew hopeless. At the same time, Patty was spiraling completely out of control elsewhere, eventually shooting Victor Newman during her breakdown. Victor desperately needed a heart transplant to survive, and in one of the most heartbreaking decisions imaginable, Tracy ultimately allowed Colleen's heart to save Victor's life after learning her daughter would never recover. The pain of that loss scarred the Abbott family forever, and now, years later, Victor has recklessly invited that same dangerous instability back into everyone's lives by bringing Patty back to Genoa City in the first place. Even worse, Victor's actions may have reignited Patty's obsession with Jack in ways no one fully understands yet. By orchestrating situations that brought Patty and Jack into close proximity again, Victor may have unintentionally strengthened Patty's belief that Jack secretly wants her. Patty's distorted interpretation of the assault on the yacht likely only intensified her delusions further, convincing her there is still passion and connection between them despite Jack's repeated rejection. In Patty's mind, Diane is simply the final barrier preventing their destined future together. And if Patty believes threatening Diane's safety is the fastest way to force Jack into choosing her, then there is no telling how far she may be willing to go. The truly terrifying part is that Jack would probably do almost anything to protect Diane if Patty revealed herself as the kidnapper. Patty likely knows that too. She understands that Jack's love for Diane would push him into impossible choices if Diane's life were hanging in the balance. If Patty demanded marriage in exchange for Diane's freedom, Jack would undoubtedly be horrified and disgusted by the ultimatum. Yet the possibility remains that he might still agree if it meant keeping Diane alive. Patty's fantasy does not care about consent, mutual love, or emotional truth. She only cares about getting Jack, no matter how twisted the path becomes. Somewhere deep inside her unstable mind, she has already built an entire happily ever after story where she and Jack ride off together while Diane disappears from their lives forever. Of course, there remains the possibility that none of this is happening at all. Perhaps the truth will turn out to be something painfully ordinary and anticlimactic. Maybe Diane impulsively traveled to San Francisco without telling Kyle. Maybe she decided to disappear for a quiet spa retreat without her phone. Maybe a voicemail never got delivered or messages somehow became lost. Genoa City has certainly delivered disappointing fake-outs before, but the emotional weight surrounding Diane's final message to Jack makes those explanations feel increasingly unlikely. Diane sounded hopeful, vulnerable, and determined to repair her marriage. She was coming home to Jack, and then suddenly she was gone. That is why the possibility of Patty intercepting Diane feels so chillingly believable. Perhaps Patty deleted Diane's voicemail before Jack could hear it. Perhaps she ambushed Diane on her way to the Abbott mansion and dragged her into captivity before anyone realized what had happened. Maybe at this very moment, Diane is trapped somewhere terrified and helpless while Patty continues fantasizing about wedding bells and a future with Jack Abbott. The tension building around this storyline feels explosive, and it seems inevitable that the truth, whatever horrifying form it takes, is about to erupt into the open very soon. And if Patty truly harms Diane in any way, there may be consequences extending far beyond Jack and the Abbott family. Nikki Newman could finally be forced to confront the horrifying reality of what Victor has unleashed by bringing Patty back into their world. For years, Nikki has struggled with Victor's endless cycle of manipulation, control, and moral compromise. But seeing the destruction Patty causes may finally shatter any remaining illusions she has about the man Victor truly is. Because if Patty's violence spirals out of control again, then Victor bears responsibility for reopening the door to chaos in the first place. And perhaps for Nikki, that realization could finally become the breaking point. The moment she understands once and for all that Victor Newman is not redeemable, will never truly change, and may never deserve the love and loyalty she continues giving him. As fear spreads through the Abbott family, the emotional pressure surrounding Diane's disappearance begins tightening like a vice around everyone connected to her. Kyle can barely hide the panic growing inside him because every passing hour without hearing from his mother makes the situation feel less like a misunderstanding and more like a nightmare unfolding in real time. The uncertainty becomes unbearable. Diane had spent years fighting to rebuild trust with her son after the devastation caused by her fake death and years away from Genoa City, and now that hard-earned bond suddenly feels threatened all over again. Kyle cannot shake the sickening feeling that his mother would never willingly disappear after finally repairing her relationship with him and reclaiming her place in the Abbott family. The silence surrounding Diane starts to feel almost haunting, like the calm before a storm everyone senses coming, but no one can yet stop. Meanwhile, Jack's growing guilt begins eating away at him from the inside. Diane's final voicemail replays endlessly in his mind, every word now carrying a heavier emotional weight than before. She had reached out to him with honesty and vulnerability, admitting she was still hurt but also confessing that she loved him enough to keep fighting for their marriage. Diane wanted to move forward together. She wanted healing, forgiveness, and another chance at happiness. And now Jack cannot stop wondering whether Diane vanished because she tried to come back to him. The possibility that something terrible happened to her while she was on her way to the Abbott mansion becomes almost impossible for him to ignore. Every memory of their recent fight suddenly twists into regret, and Jack finds himself desperately wishing he had answered her call sooner, listened more carefully, or somehow protected her before everything spiraled out of control. At the same time, Patty's behavior becomes increasingly unsettling, even for someone as unpredictable as her. There is a strange confidence in the way she carries herself now, almost as though she is privately savoring a secret victory no one else has discovered yet. When she crosses paths with Jack again, there is an eerie calmness behind her smile, a quiet satisfaction that feels completely disconnected from the seriousness of Diane's disappearance. Patty continues speaking about the future as though she already knows exactly how events will unfold. To everyone around her, her words sound bizarre and delusional, but beneath the surface, there may be something far darker driving that confidence. Because if Patty truly believes she now controls the obstacle standing between herself and Jack, then in her mind the ending has already been written. The terrifying reality is that Patty does not view her actions as evil. Inside her fractured psychology, she likely sees herself as someone fighting for true love, someone correcting an injustice that kept her and Jack apart for years. That warped perspective is what makes her so dangerous. Patty never fully accepts rejection because she interprets every setback as temporary. Every time Jack pushes her away, she convinces herself he is confused, manipulated, or simply afraid of his real feelings. And every time Diane reappears in Jack's life, Patty sees her not as a human being but as an obstacle that must somehow be removed. Her obsession has reached the point where morality no longer matters. The only thing that matters is winning. As Jack begins piecing together the timeline of Diane's disappearance, his suspicion toward Patty grows impossible to suppress. The flowers, the cryptic note, Patty's unsettling comments about surprises and challenges, suddenly all of it starts forming a horrifying picture. Jack likely begins calling everyone he can think of, desperately searching for any trace of Diane. He may contact the Genoa City Athletic Club staff, Jabat employees, friends, family members, even security contacts, hoping someone saw Diane after she left that voicemail. But the deeper he digs, the more disturbing the silence becomes. It is as though Diane vanished into thin air, and the more impossible the mystery becomes, the more Jack's mind drifts toward the one person capable of orchestrating something this unstable and personal. Somewhere hidden away from Genoa City, Diane may already be living through a nightmare she never saw coming. If Patty truly kidnapped her, the emotional horror of the situation would be overwhelming. Diane would likely realize very quickly that this is not about money or revenge in the ordinary sense. This is about obsession. Patty would probably speak to Diane with twisted politeness, almost treating her like an inconvenience standing in the way of destiny rather than a real person with fears, pain, and a family searching desperately for her. That emotional detachment is what makes Patty's instability so frightening. She can commit horrifying acts while still believing she is the victim, still believing she deserves sympathy and love. And for Diane, trapped alone with someone so emotionally unpredictable, every second would feel dangerous. The Abbott cabin remains one of the most chilling possibilities for Diane's location because of the emotional history tied to it. The isolation of the cabin, surrounded by silence and hidden far enough away from the chaos of Genoa City, creates the perfect setting for Patty's fantasy world to take shape. It is the kind of place where time feels disconnected from reality, where Patty could convince herself she and Jack are somehow starting over while Diane remains hidden away like a secret nobody is meant to find. But there is also a cruel, symbolic darkness to the cabin itself. Years ago, that same place became tied to fear, kidnapping, and tragedy because of Patty's actions involving Colleen Carlton. Returning to that location now would almost feel like history threatening to repeat itself in even more horrifying ways. The memory of Colleen's death still casts a shadow over the Abbott family, especially over Jack and Tracy. The pain of losing her never fully disappeared, and Patty's connection to that tragedy remains impossible to separate from her presence. Colleen had only tried to help someone she thought was vulnerable and in danger. Instead, she became trapped inside Patty's unraveling madness, and the consequences destroyed an entire family forever. That history alone is enough to make Jack terrified if he truly believes Patty has Diane now. Because Jack knows better than anyone how quickly Patty's instability can escalate from manipulation to violence. He knows what happens when Patty feels cornered, rejected, or desperate to hold on to her fantasy world. Victor Newman's involvement in all of this adds another layer of emotional complexity and anger simmering beneath the surface. There is a growing sense that Victor underestimated just how dangerous Patty could become once her obsession with Jack reignited. Perhaps Victor believed he could use Patty as a pawn against the Abbotts without unleashing the full chaos buried inside her unstable mind. But if Diane truly becomes another victim of Patty's obsession, then Victor's fingerprints are all over the disaster unfolding now. He reopened the door to Patty's darkest impulses, giving her access, encouragement, and proximity to the very fixation that has consumed her for years. And if innocent people suffer because of it, Victor may finally be forced to face consequences even he cannot manipulate away. For Nikki Newman, the emotional fallout could become impossible to ignore. Nikki has spent years trying to believe there is still humanity buried somewhere beneath Victor's ruthless exterior. She has forgiven betrayal after betrayal, manipulation after manipulation, convincing herself that Victor's love somehow balances the destruction he leaves behind. But seeing Patty spiral into violence again may finally force Nikki to confront a painful truth she has avoided for far too long. Victor consistently unleashes dangerous chaos into people's lives whenever it benefits him, and he rarely accepts responsibility afterward. If Diane is truly harmed because Patty was empowered and emboldened by Victor's interference, Nikki may finally see the horrifying pattern clearly, and once she sees it fully, there may be no way for her to unsee it again. Back at the Abbott mansion, the emotional atmosphere grows heavier with every new realization. Kyle becomes increasingly frantic, struggling to hold himself together as fear for Diane intensifies. The possibility that he could lose his mother after finally rebuilding their relationship feels unbearably cruel. Jack, meanwhile, becomes consumed by determination and dread in equal measure. He knows that if Patty is behind this, then time may already be running dangerously short. Patty's fantasies tend to collapse violently whenever reality threatens to intrude, and if Diane resists her or if Jack refuses Patty's demands, the situation could spiral into deadly territory very quickly. And perhaps the most tragic part of all is that Patty genuinely believes love is guiding her actions. Somewhere inside her fractured mind, she sees herself not as a villain, but as a woman fighting for the happiness she believes destiny promised her long ago. She imagines a future where Jack finally understands her, forgives her, and chooses her willingly. She likely pictures herself standing beside him as his wife while the chaos surrounding Diane simply fades away. But the heartbreaking truth Patty refuses to accept is that love built through fear, manipulation, and violence is not love at all. It is obsession wearing love's face. And unless someone stops Patty before her fantasy fully collapses, Genoa City may be heading toward another devastating tragedy that leaves permanent scars on everyone caught in its path.